Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar 24, number 24. Today, we will be hearing from David Iwaniec of the SETS Convergence Project, and then we'll have some time at the end to talk about NATURA network, partner network opportunities, and briefly touch on the Tnoc Festival coming up at the end of the month. David, you can go ahead and share your screen whenever you're ready.
Thank you so much, Tessa. Let me click these buttons. You're seeing slide view, not presenter view?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I'm really grateful to be here. Thank you very much, NATURA. I'm David Iwaniec, and on behalf of the leadership team for the SETS Convergence Project, I'm really excited to be able to introduce this network. This is the Social, Ecological, and Technological Convergence Network, and this is in support of climate adaptation and transformation. Notice also the URX logo there on the bottom, even the website it's presented there. You probably have heard a little bit about URX. There was a great webinar really early on it given by Nancy. We are very much a part of URX, or are we a daughter of URX, a sub-network, a little bit of all those things as part of URX, and this work grew out of that network. And so let me talk a little bit about, so why do we call ourselves the SETS Convergence Network? So first, a little bit about the framing. You've heard about SETS already a little bit. The SETS framing does come from the URX network. We have been building on this and using this in our projects. This puts an emphasis on the interactions among the social, ecological, technological domains of our cities. And this allows us, it's just as much as an organizing framework as it is a conceptual framing to help us in opening up the problem space in our cities, opening up the solution space, navigating the complexity between the problems and solutions, and engaging diverse knowledge. There on the right, I want to talk a little bit about convergence also. We very much think of convergence as a process. So this on the top is kind of deep convergence. Isn't necessarily an outcome. It's more of what we are moving toward. So think of this more as a ladder of convergence. So at first, maybe we start from recognizing SETS interactions to thinking about as a group, understandings of SETS interactions, and to finally maybe more sense-making of SETS interactions. And so we think of this as starting off maybe early on in the network as we're engaging with SETS, but we're still framing it predominantly from individuals or groups from a disciplinary primacy or a particular issue framing might be dominant. And as it progresses maybe up this ladder of convergence, think of it more as you're using your disciplinary or the issue framing, but only as an entry point to understand, as an entry point for more integrated SETS understanding. And finally, we're getting to maybe a place where we're actually co-generating together new SETS framings, approaches, and solutions. So this one might be what this kind of ladder looks like. But of course, also in the real world, I mean, these are multi-actor networks among researchers and practitioners, decision makers, community members. These networks are messy. Actors can come and go, new community priorities can emerge. And so again, this is a process. Yes. Oh, I thought I heard something on the microphone. Call my name. I guess I didn't. Trying to switch slides. This the SETS Convergence Network is very much place-based and stakeholder-driven. We're grounding our network by embedding ourselves in 4 cities. So this is Atlanta, New York, Phoenix, and San Juan. In each of our cities, we're partnering with diverse stakeholders. They help us steer our research direction. They support knowledge co-generation activities toward these transformative pathways that we're seeking toward. Across the kind of multiple scales and the multiple sectors that we work in our cities, who these stakeholders are, it can differ among the different initiatives that we have going on in each city. So what I'll do is I'll give a deeper dive in the second half of this to kind of show you what that looks like. But I do want to point out that, that is just one example that I'll be giving, because who's involved, how they're involved, even how much of this research is stakeholder driven can vary through time and can shift among the different, vary through time and among the different projects and initiatives that we're a part of. So a little bit of kind of framing here. So our research question, as you see here on the very top, it focuses on developing a SETS understanding, but also goes beyond this systems understanding, so that we can use this toward more sense making and to foster change. So how do SETS domains interact to generate vulnerabilities or resilience to climate-related extreme events? And then also, how can these urban SETS dynamics be guided along more resilient, equitable, and sustainable trajectories? This is our approach to doing this, kind of a big picture kind of framing for the types of different activities among the different work that we do in our 4 cities. So for example, taking stock, we're looking at existing SETS knowledge, assets, transformative capacities. We do scenario visioning in our cities to co-develop these pathways of SETS transformations. What can they look like? What are our goals? What are our goals to change? We do SETS assessments. This is more of a reflexive process, both qualitative and quantitative approaches to evaluate and refine the pathways of change. And then finally, the transitions labs, where we're fostering these pathways to build capacity and building capacity for change. I have to admit, we originally thought of this as a lot more sequential. And what we're finding is it's very much kind of an iterative process as we're moving through the different initiatives in our cities. Notice though also across these 4 different pieces of the work that we do, from taking stock to the transitions lab, there's a strong kind of transformative capacities framing associated with it. And so this capacity building approach is very much kind of underlies the work that we do. And so whether we're in taking stock, we're talking about taking stock, identifying the existing transformative capacities within our communities, or the scenario visioning to envision this transformational change, so that we can diagnose and understand what are the capacities needed to on-ramp onto new trajectories, and which of those transformative capacities should we be building. So these are just an example of just one of the initiatives that we're doing in each of our cities. So in New York City, our city leads are Elizabeth Cook and Timon McPherson. An example of one of the projects that they're working on there is with the Mayor's Office of Climate Resiliency, doing co-production anticipatory capacity building with them toward the climate adaptation roadmap. In Atlanta, we're developing a community practice around sustainable transformations, the Atlanta Transformative Leaders, ATL group. In Phoenix, working with CapLTR on right now on zero carbon climate justice pathways and decision support. Where I'm gonna take a deep dive is into the San Juan example, where the Alianza community practice is working toward an integrated water management, nature-based vision. And so now I'm gonna switch gears a little bit. We're thinking about a case study in San Juan. San Juan is subject to frequent coastal urban riverine floods. Rio Piedras, it's an urban watershed. It's a high incidence of nuisance flooding around the surrounding neighborhoods. The northern part of the watershed on the top of this figure that you see here is the lowest elevation, the most urbanized. Stormwater infrastructure is overwhelmed frequently by extreme events, most notably 30 inches of rain during Hurricane Maria in 2017 overwhelmed that infrastructure. And these extreme events like tropical cyclones like Maria and other extreme rainfall events are expected to continue to increase. So this community practice I talked about, Alianza, It's a multi-sector, multi-scale community practice with government agencies, federal, state, municipal, scientists, NGOs, private practitioners, community groups, activists, residents, all promoting sustainable and equitable development pathways and climate resilience for this Rio Piedras watershed. And Alianza, it particularly took a direct role in watershed governance upon learning of a project to channelize that main river of the watershed of the city, the Rio Piedras. And so a little bit about the framing of that impetus for this kind of direct engagement for watershed governance. So this dominant framing was coming from the Army Corps of Engineers. It was reenacting a plan that was about 30 years old to initiate a channelization. So think concrete bottom, concrete sides, straightening and widening of the Rio Piedras, of the Rio Piedras. This is 11 miles, 17.7 kilometers of river, $2.5 billion in federal funding. And Alianza, members of Alianza were concerned that this was an inappropriate solution to mitigate flood, given the new social, ecological, and technological conditions. I don't seem to have mouse control anymore, do I? Oh, I did, there we go. And they were worried that it might have more devastating impacts to long-term social and ecological sustainability. The Alianza was also concerned with the lack of public engagement and participation in the planning and approval of this process. And so the Alianza developed an overall strategy to diagnose, facilitate, and accelerate a more integrated nature-based watershed approach to flood management. There's a number of different interventions that were developed, and these were centered on this kind of capacity building framework. And so you see capacities here, such as anticipatory capacities, partnership and coalition building, capacities along the lines of power and agency. And I'm going to focus in on just 4 of these capacities to give you an example. And this first one is knowledge brokering, second one of connecting and aligning, third one of anticipating, building anticipatory capacities, and capacities to build equity. And these took place in a number of different settings, these convergent spaces, we call them, community dialogues, charrettes, workshops, transition meetings, a number of different informal settings also was important to doing this. So I'm talking knowledge brokering, for example, I'm talking about linking, I keep losing my slides, linking different types of knowledge, scientific, engineering, residential, local, professional. And so one of the ways that looked like, for example, for knowledge brokering was to conduct a technical analysis of the knowledge base that was informing the rationale and the design of this river channelization strategy, to provide the Army Corps both an up-to-date understanding of the existing conditions, and also to kind of question the lack of more anticipatory analysis, for example, including sea level rise, rainfall projections, changes in population demographics associated with this work. Another key capacity, of course, is this equity building, connecting, and aligning. There was a number of different approaches for this capacity building, focusing on knowledge dissemination, virtual and in-person dialogues, more technical support to help them build surveys, for example, that the community has administered, ongoing relationship building through emails, social media, informal meetings. Those logos that you see here on the top right, those are from new community organizations that's formed since these interventions have taken place. And also I want to talk about anticipatory capacity building that we've been doing, asking questions like, what would a nature-based approach to flood management in the Rio Piedras look like? So here we're exploring these alternative pathways from risk-based to resilience-based approaches to flood management in San Juan. This took place in a number of different settings, visioning workshops, charrettes, for example, to think about place specifically what these future places can and should look like. Some of the outcomes also from this capacity building I want to speak to a little bit. So for example, one of the examples I want to highlight is the changes in the Army Corps processes and design. There's been a lot of changes in terms of how we've been engaging with the leadership for the Army Corps, creating awareness around local conditions and issues with the projects. That technical knowledge updates to the hydrological modeling, for example, and changes in general design. Importantly, this elevating the community concerns, elevating their voices, giving them and asking the Army Corps to open up for more participatory engagement. What we're starting to see, it's in red, so not quite an outcome yet, is this more promoting interagency coordination across the federal, state, and city agencies. This change, though, is still fairly incremental, and we recognize that it's not transformative enough. This is very much an ongoing transformation process that I'm highlighting here. Another outcome is this community empowerment and stewarding. In the top center image there, you see one of our team members, Mundi Colon, a landscape architect. He's talking about different nature-based solutions to address flooding issues in the watershed. On the top right there, you see Tisha. She's talking about the existing legal and governance structures for urban and river flood management to community members. That bottom image there, you see residents from the communities that have organized a festival, a social music gathering to celebrate Rio Piedras, also to create awareness around new tools that are developing. For example, using WhatsApp, upstream members are taking photographs of flooding events to alert more downstream residents that this is occurring. And this is a really big transformation. 10 years ago, como se dice en inglés, they had their backs turned to the river. And so I want to emphasize the importance of these kind of concurrent capacity building interventions from the community all the way up to the powerful actors, in this case, for example, the Army Corps, in order to on-ramp onto hopefully a more different pathway altogether. And I really want to thank you, NATURA. It's been such a pleasure to be able to introduce you to our network.
Thanks so much, David. Does anyone have any questions? We have some time now for that. I guess I'll start off. I was just wondering if you encountered any other, I know you mentioned with the San Juan location, you encountered some, some social setbacks in regard to, the locals were not, sorry, it's like 6 a.m. here. My brain is moving south. I'm just wondering if you encountered any other social setbacks in any other of the locations that you guys focus on. And I know it seemed like you had developed some sort of system. I can't remember the other points of it, but one of them was anticipate. I think that was in response to the social setback in San Juan. Like, I don't know when that happened, if you guys were looking at all of these locations at the same time, or if you kind of did them one by one, and if you kind of had this system in place before you looked at other locations. But I'm just wondering if you had any.
Yeah, if I forget a piece of that, Tessa, just kind of nudge me back on track. Yes, we're definitely working in all 4 of these cities concurrently, but they're very much not in the same place. For example, we are building up work in Urex. So we've been working in 3 of the 4 of these cities in Urex. That 4th city, Atlanta, where I'm based out of, we've had a lot of catching up to do. And so, for example, with the answer that I described in San Juan, this has been developed kind of throughout the course of the initiative through the Urex program. On the other hand, I mentioned a community of practice, the ATL, Atlantic Transformative Leaders, that we're developing here in Atlanta. And that's very much in its nascent phase. It's not even following the same kind of trajectory as we did in San Juan. As you can imagine, very different contexts, very different actors are at play with that. You mentioned some of the other challenges. You know, for example, I mean, I could probably list some of the social challenges probably all day here, but one of the ones that come to mind for our work in San Juan, for example, is the communities. You know, this wasn't we're talking about giving voice to communities. The communities weren't necessarily predominantly they weren't all, it's not one voice, right? And so these different neighborhoods and different community members had different values and preferences. And this is very much kind of a negotiation process. There was territoriality also. Once they started getting media attention and attention of the municipal government, of the mayor's office, these different community groups started to compete with each other for resources, even ones that had the same kind of overall goal and mission. And so Alianza served in that case initially to kind of foster this community engagement and linking them and aligning them with federal, state, and city agencies. But then it emerged this new role of needing to be a broker also among the community organizations that were newly emerging as part of the process.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I guess I'm a little surprised to hear that there is some competition, but I'm less familiar with the research side of nature-based solutions. And just before I relinquish my talking time, I'm just going to ask what I think San Juan was the only, non-mainland US city that you guys look at. What made you, is that correct? What made you choose San Juan?
I want to be honest, actually. I could tell you a story about biogeochemical, differences in templates, conditions of the context and conditions of the city. And those are all fascinating. I bet I could do that with any city, though, that you asked me that question. To be honest, so this was an existing city in the UREX network. And it wouldn't have been possible without the UREX project. So that was an important factor. It's not all of the cities. There's a lot more than 4 cities. There are 10 in the UREX network. And a lot of it just kind of come together with kind of aligned ideas, shared values. These are someone I like to, this is a city team with Mundi, Elia, led by Tisha Munoz Erickson, that I love to share a glass of wine with. And a lot of it just kind of happens opportunistically like that. I want to be completely honest about.
Thanks for sharing that. Nancy?
Never underestimate the power of a glass of wine, Tessa.
Words of wisdom. Did you say, sorry, Nancy, you're muted. Did you say you want to?
I said there's a question in the chat. You might want to take that one first.
Yeah, Masa has asked in the chat, can you comment more on how you measure if the flood project is sufficiently transformative or not? Masa, I don't know if you want to elaborate before David answers.
I think, yeah, the question is, yeah, as you said.
Yeah, I mean, so there's, there's a lot of different metrics that we're thinking about when we're thinking about it as a transformative. And so one of the important things, of course, that we're looking at is in the change in the project design itself. I mean, so moving from a pathway of concrete channelization to more of a nature-based vision for integrated watershed management. And so that will be, of course, kind of it's a centering goal of that example that I gave. But there's a lot of other really important, equally important transformative changes, metrics that we're looking for. Some of them not so quantitative as slowing down the flow rate in the river to more qualitative ones, for example, the kind of coalition building, organizing, self-empowering, self-efficacy, self-determinations, agency roles of the communities itself, and these new kind of coalitions that are forming. And so those that are a little bit harder to kind of put you can always kind of measure number of intermediary agents and stuff like that using network analysis, which we are doing. But a lot of that is a lot more kind of qualitative, rich descriptions of how they're interacting with each other, how they're sharing resources, how they're sharing knowledge, et cetera.
Thank you.
So David, I mean, you raise a really interesting point about how there's all these different things going on in these 4 cities. And if you looked at the kind of work that might be going on for across the NATURA network for different cities around the world, nature-based solutions for resilience, or even any topic that has to do with the kinds of things we're thinking about in the SETS Convergence Project, I guess the question, and I'll admit I'm asking this from the standpoint of being somebody who's who's involved in the leadership of this thing. But how do we actually get to the point where we are starting to I mean, is there an idea about not just doing a bunch of projects in 4 cities and pulling, and then talking about those individually, but pulling them together in some way? How do we start to think about what lessons we can extract from looking across those four cities and what we're learning?
Yeah.
I mean, this is the question for us for us all to ask, right?
Yeah. I don't have an answer to that, but I can talk about some of the ways that we've been thinking about doing that already. So, for example, I talked a lot about this kind of underlying transformative capacities framing, and that's a theory of change that's associated. It's very much embedded in all the different initiatives that we're doing with the SETS Convergence work. And I think, for example, there's a number of folks that have been interested in this. Did I see Leilani and Marta on the call? No, I see Leilani, but I don't see Marta. So Leilani Manetti and Marta Verbis both have been really interested, for example, in thinking about these transformative capacities as a framework, thinking about these transformative capacities across our cities. Which ones of these capacities make sense for which cities? Why do they not in other cities? Very much thinking about in terms of the scenario visioning work that we've done. Also, do particular goals and kind of future aspirations lend itself to a diagnostic need to particular types of transformative capacities? I would argue that Nancy, you and Marta, Elizabeth Cook and I, and Tisha Munizarks and Nikki, oh my goodness, I'm forgetting folks, Robert Lloyd, this group for the nature-based pathways that's led by Mandy Kuhn, that's one of the NATURA task forces, is taking that approach, thinking about, well, what are the kind of different patterns and commonalities across our cities? How can we better understand transformative changes toward nature-based solutions that have been successful, in order to say what can we learn and how can we enable them better? So that's at least one approach that we've been starting to take. But there's many different types of this kind of comparative urban research that we need to be doing, should be doing. Which ones do we prioritize? Yeah, I'd probably go to you for that question, to be honest.
Good try. Not going to happen at 7 o'clock in the morning. I think there's another question from Timon in the chat.
David, what would you say are highlights of nature-based solutions coming out of this work? So I would definitely want to highlight for San Juan time and of course the Rio Piedras project that we're working with. It's gone way beyond this idea of a flood control issue, and now very much conversations around around water quality, around recreation and aesthetics, around biodiversity. These conversations are this kind of multifunctional conversations around this kind of nature-based, this nature-based solution. The integrated watershed approach to Rio Piedras is definitely one of them. In Atlanta, one of the big progresses we've made here is a reframing of some of the large green infrastructure projects to include this kind of nature-based solutions thinking. So, for example, not just thinking about kind of the Beltline that we have here, a linear park encircling Atlanta, as just in terms of moving people and providing park space, but asking questions of can we manage it for as a connectivity for biodiversity, connectivity, hydrologic connectivity for flooding. We're trying to use it to kind of expand that conversation. I'm going to defer to the city leads for Phoenix, Nancy and Michael, if they have an example from Phoenix, and you and Elizabeth, if you have one for New York. Oh, and I forgot to mention the Atlanta City team is Lani Minetti, Robert Hobbins, and myself leading that team up.
David, I was also asking to get at Nancy's question a little bit too, in terms of, are there learnings or things to kind of unite across these city projects in the way nature-based solutions are being addressed, framed, conceptualized or implemented? And, are there, of those verbs, are there things that we might be able to look at across these that would be really interesting, I think, for NATURA as well?
Yeah, I think there's some parallels with the with the work that's going on in San Juan with some things we're trying to get started in Phoenix with regard to the river in Phoenix, the non-river in Phoenix, that involve listening to and communicate and bringing forward community voices from those areas that are along the river. So there was some work on future visioning for the river that Marta Berbes was involved in, and Mandy Kuhn with youth, and in South Phoenix, which is one of the areas of Phoenix that has been sort of historically marginalized. And then I would say that a lot of the work that's being done in Phoenix that has been led in part by the Nature Conservancy. They're a real driving force on some of these heat solutions for neighborhoods. And so some of the things that they've been doing and we've been doing in collaboration with them involve, getting communities to develop their own heat action plans. And then most recently, a heat leadership academy that they put on with academics and others, sort of developing the modules for this online training for community members living in hot neighborhoods to figure out, how do we deal with heat? What are some of the issues of heat and that kind of thing? So I would say that some of the commonalities across the cities are probably the ways in which we're developing partnerships that allow voices that haven't been heard previously to sort of step up and really be able to have a voice in decision making and so forth.
Yeah, I kind of want to also bring up a tension also that we've talked a lot about in not just the SETS Convergence Network, but in the UREX network. And that is we are ambitious networks, but at the same time, there's a limited amount of resources, mainly time, to do things. And I can't tell you how many times when we're deciding what to prioritize, because we have so many fun directions that we want to go to. And we're thinking about these more kind of synthesis activities, comparative activities, and we're thinking, oh, excellent. Let's look at enabling conditions for transformative changes, in our different cities, and let's compare them. Or let's look at how the different cities are framing nature-based solutions, and how they're similar and why they might be very different at times. But that's also in direct conflict sometimes with questions like questions and motives to do this kind of on-the-ground research with our communities and our cities. And there is a tension with our resources, I have to admit. And sometimes when we have to make these kind of high, these difficult choices, right? And we do end up doing both. I think we're a young network, SETS Convergence right now, and I fully recognize that we've been focusing a lot more on the work within our cities. We've made some progress toward the synthesis, but it hasn't really been a focus quite yet, but maybe it should be more so.
And David, when was, sorry if you mentioned this earlier on in the presentation, but when was SETS Convergence started? What year? And then how long are you funded to go through?
It's a 5-year project. Funded, started.
Right at the beginning of COVID, right? Like everything else.
Yes, right around the beginning of COVID. So I'd say
about the same time as NATURA.
2.5 years ago, about the same time as NATURA. But I wouldn't say, we don't think of it as a funded project though, to be honest. We think of it as, again, very much a network, a sub-network or daughter of UREX. And so this is going to, it's, I don't think of it as tied to the funding very much. It's more of a fun community. I can tell you, Elizabeth and Timon and Leilani and myself and Nancy and Mike, we're going to be continuing this work in our cities and working together, for example, long beyond the life of that funding.
Yeah.
Do you mind if I do it on the side? That's a really important consideration because that's something also we've been talking a lot about in our network. I'm curious if other groups have been talking about this, and this idea of how do we deprojectify, I'm making up a word here, how do we make it less about the project and more about the community of practice that we're trying to build and the changes that we're trying to foster. And the reason why we do that is we recognize that 3-year, 5-year funding cycles can vary and you can kind of overlap them. But it's less about the funded projects, right? But more about what the communities that you're trying to create and the change that you're trying to foster that can last so much longer than these funding timeframes. At the same time, it's not fair to, otherwise it wouldn't be fair, right? To the community partners that you work with to kind of, what would happen? What's the alternative? To kind of pack up and disappear, shut your academic office door, after the end of the 5-year project. I mean, that doesn't work, right? You can't do that. And I'm curious how other networks and how other groups are thinking about how to do that, what that looks like. Yeah, good point, Nancy.
Yeah, it's something that we've been trying to think about, just overall engagement and building connections with our network members. Specifically, I guess, NATURA started around the same time, but so we've only been able to meet virtually up until our upcoming all hands meeting. But
good segue, Tessa.
Yeah, segue. But if anyone has other things, from any other projects, ideas on David's question, feel free to speak up.
And we do have Elvia on the line now, I see, leading up the San Juan team. Oh, you've been on. I just now I'm seeing the participant list. You can direct any SETS Convergence questions to go ahead and send them to me if you'd like. If you want to hear more about that Iwaniec study that I highlighted, Elvia will be a lot better person than I would be. Hey, Elvia.
Hola. I think you did a great summary. And I guess in terms of adding something to the projects, I always keep thinking, what are the tipping points of transformation? It's like we're very good at describing the system, at understanding the barriers, but do we really have a grasp on what are those tipping points of transformation? I think these kinds of networks are very good at triggering community participation. But, I say it again and again, sometimes there are barriers, governance barriers at the top that make it really hard. So, will we ever be able to pinpoint generalizable tipping points of transformation? So
That's a really good point, Elvia, because I think that I had a conversation with the Nature Conservancy folks yesterday. They're doing their strategic planning and they're trying to think, how do they make the stuff they've been doing scale up? What are the barriers to actually implementing these kinds of transformative changes that have been done at very small scales up to like a whole city? And a lot of those barriers are exactly what you say. They're the the sort of governance, the way that institutions are set in their ways, and so forth, that make it really difficult. I mean, Army Corps is a great example of that. They've sort of claimed that they've changed a little bit over time, and maybe they have, but that's a big thing to come up against.
Conceptually thinking, I've always wondered also if the SES resilience literature has oversimplified the idea of a regime shift, of a transformative change, by using the term tipping point. And I think I have been slowly kind of moving more toward an understanding of very much embedded in SETS understanding, as a matter of fact, more about thinking about these type of shifts more as a series of interlinked SETS inflection points that occur at different scales and different places within our, the regions that we're working in. I don't know, it's a little too early for me to be pushing back on on such an important body of literature, but to be honest, I've been moving away toward thinking of it as a tipping point for a system, and more kind of these multitude of inflection points across the SET system. We'll talk about this more later, though, Elvia.
yes.
Over a glass of wine.
And I hate to cut the conversation short, but I think it is time that we move on if we want to leave a little bit of time for, any member network opportunities or topics, things of interest. I also
community. I'm so lucky to have been able to introduce this.
Thank you, David. And
thank you, David.
Yeah, if anyone wants to continue the conversation with David or everyone in the chat, just go ahead and post away. Let me just start off by reminding everyone about the Tnoc Festival that's coming up at the end of the month. let's see, share my screen. Okay, you can now see my extremely packed browser tabs. Don't look at it. Let's see. Sorry, there are so many Zoom things. It's hard to see.
Slideshow up at the upper right.
Upper right, slideshow. Okay.
Yeah.
Here we go. So just a reminder on the dates, March 29th to the 31st. I'll come back to these sessions in just a minute, but this is just a rundown on how to register. As a NATURA member, you get free access to the festival using this system right here. The key thing is putting in the password welcome when you register. So I also sent this over an email. I believe it was last week. Sorry, a garbage truck is just happening to go by right now. I just sent this over last week, so you should all have it in your inboxes as well. But go ahead and take a picture or screenshot if you need to.
And the organizer, David Maddox, who spoke with us 2 webinars ago, is encouraging people to not only register, you have to be registered to participate, but also to sign up for the different sessions that you're interested in, so that the organizers of those sessions know who's coming. And I would encourage that, because we would like to know who's coming to the one I'm organizing or helping to organize.
Yes, great point. And here are just some of the sessions. I showed them last time. These are also available to see on our website, or when you register in the Tnoc Festival, website, you'll be able to see these as well. I believe there are 2 that are missing right now. If you type in, or if you go to NATURA specific sessions, there are 2 that aren't showing up, but I'm working with David to make sure that that's changed soon. And I will be putting the link to the Tnoc Festival webpage on the NATURA. Well, it's on the NATURA site right now, but we have these sessions listed there as well. So I'll put the link from the NATURA site into the chat. Stop sharing my screen. And aside from that, the other big thing we have going on is the upcoming all hands meeting for NATURA being held in Malta. And this is our first in-person meeting. So we're very excited about that. I don't think that there's really much for me to say on it as of right now, unless
the draft agenda is going to be coming up pretty soon.
Yes.
So that's worth knowing. So that y'all are that have been asking for that, you'll be seeing that soon.
Yes, thank you for that. Yeah, we'll be sending that out soon, and we are also going to be including an opportunity for attendees to contribute in some way to the agenda and send over ideas on what they want to see, things like that. So I think now we can just open it up to, unless anyone has questions on the couple things that I just went over, we can open it up to any additional opportunities, publications of interest, anything coming out of our member networks that you want people to know about.
Well, I guess I would just like to say that at the because we have the Nature of Cities Festival the very week before the all hands meeting, and not everyone is able to go to the all hands meeting. We should take advantage of the ability to get together and learn what people have been doing at the Nature of Cities Festival. But for the all hands meeting, I'm pleased to say that we have a very large contingent of early career researchers who are going to actually be able to join us there, including our fellows and others. So I think that speaks well for sort of the future of NATURA and the kinds of interactions that we have, to have these early career researchers there working with us on various sorts of issues. So I don't know what our next I'm not sure when our next call for fellows is going to come out, or for TWGs or anything like that. Tessa, I've kind of lost track of the schedule that we had agreed on, but really encouraging people to get their members of their networks who are early career researchers to become involved in NATURA, because that seems to be a really important part of the overall project.
Well, if anyone has, something to advertise, speak now, or I think we might be wrapping up a few minutes early.
And if you're shy, you can always send your stuff to Tessa to post in the newsletter or on the website. We want to hear about what everybody's doing, so don't be shy.
And it looks like Chris sent something over in the chat, an event going on.
Hey everybody, just really quick, we have a really great event for New York City Open Data Week tonight with some panelists discussing the use of open data to visualize flood risk, especially in New York City. So anybody that's in the area might be of interest. It's going to kick out at 6 o'clock virtually online, and just pop the link into the chat. So hope you can join us.
Thanks, Chris. And thank you, David, for presenting. I think some awesome conversations happened because of it.
I'm just glad Z didn't have a question, because his questions are always so hard.
Z did have a comment in the chat, not a question, but a comment, I think at the very end. Awesome. All right, well, thank you everyone for joining today, maybe tonight, depending on where you are, not really sure.
Thanks, everybody.